Welcome to Rot Drw's October 2020 Love-Hate List, where Erlan Rots and Salmondrw discuss which albums we loved and hated this month.
Consider it our October surprise. Each month we review 6 albums as well as assign the other person one to listen to, and we let you know which ones are worth your time and which ones belong in the dumpster. We then recommend an album to the other person to listen to and report back for the following month. Sometimes it's one we think the other person will totally vibe with,
and sometimes it's just to piss them off. If you like these recommendations, subscribe for more and check out our last month's list. And don't forget to comment your love and hate list down below. We're going to be beginning with Salmondrw's recommendation from last month, Dorian's Find the Sun, an indie album that was released last month and landed on Salmondrw's love list. Quite honestly, seeing Salmondrw review this album made me really hope that this would be the one that he would recommend to me. It's very strange and it changes from track to track, as he had mentioned, and it does it pretty well. Frankly, I am having trouble loving this album. I do enjoy it, and I do think it is good, and I wouldn't put this in my hate list at all, but I don't quite love it. It's a dish that, while still very delicious, is missing some key ingredient that I can't quite put my finger on. Nonetheless, I still enjoy it. Red Den through Monk's Robes is really awesome start to the album. The Illuminator is where I start to lose a little bit of interest. It is weird, and I do think it gets its point across, but I feel like it either needs to be a little bit more poppy and catchy, or it needs to be a little bit more weird, and it's kind of just living in a canyon right in between. It Was Me, and this is a track I do enjoy for the most part. The chorus feels a little bit underdeveloped, but I think the point is kind of to just constantly say, it was me, it was me. Devil's Market I also enjoy, but that's one of the notable ones that I feel like is missing a little something, and I don't feel that the middle of the album is as interesting as the very beginning or the very end. Mask of Yesterday is where I think it starts to pick up a little bit more, becomes a little bit more interesting, but Sun is where it all comes back around for me. I get a connection to the opening track Red Den in some way. It just feels like its sister song. Sun is the reason to stick through the album if you don't enjoy the very middle of it. It transforms as it goes through its 7-minute long metamorphosis, and the payoff is worth it. Congratulations. You found the sun. The best tracks, in my opinion, are Red Den, Saturday Night, Monk's Robes, and Sun. While I may have been a little bit harsh in this critique, I do want to say that none of this album is particularly bad. It's actually quite good. I guess I was just hoping for a little bit more throughout each track. Overall, good recommendation. I would still probably put this in my love list, even though I want a little bit more. It makes me excited for whatever Dorian's going to be doing in the future.
First off, Erlan, I want to respond to the album you assigned to me, Host by Colts. Now, when I saw the name of this band, I have to be honest, I thought I was in for something ear-shattering, ear-splitting, something that was going to blow my brain open. And frankly, I don't say that in a good way. I thought I was not, based on the name of the band, I thought that I was not going to be into what I was hearing. But I was really shocked and surprised, mostly because I think I listened to this band right when they first came out. And so I remembered a little bit of their sound, although I never really got into them. And at least where they are now, which is this sort of dream pop, the vocalist is really beautiful. I liked the singing on this album a lot. It's really catchy. I was totally surprised. I was really into this album. Songs like Allo, for instance, have just such a dreamy, ethereal quality to them. And at least for me, I was really surprised to find that they were kind of sugary sweet in a way that I wasn't expecting. I'm so used to that side of you that is into the purple pink kind of, really intense, ratchet it up, throw you for a loop, that the simple pleasures of this album, the more, melodic instrumentation and sort of these, keyboards and things like that you would hear that just sort of accentuate everything that's going on in it in a beautiful way. It definitely had like a shoegaze or a dream pop feel to me, kind of like a more accessible beach house, I guess. But either way, I was really digging what it was coming out, and this is definitely a band I would consider revisiting or just keeping up with future releases.
Kevin Morby is a singer-songwriter from Kansas City, known for his classic indie guitar sound, and he has released Sundowner this month. If you've been a fan of Kevin Morby, you're going to get a lot of the same classic sound he's been producing for the last few years, his bare vocals and developed guitar melodies. This record is closest to city music, if you're familiar with his music. It is a little bit more vast and stripped down. And while it does feel that way, there is a lot to enjoy. There never really is a whole lot going on, but what is going on is complex enough to keep you interested and listening, and it's catchy enough that you'll be singing the record afterwards. Bum, 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 ba-da-dum, bum, bum. The production is clean and out of the way for the most part. It's just set up for you to enjoy the guitar and vocals easily. Doesn't really do anything too fancy. I can definitely hear Kevin improving on his technical skills as the guitar work is enjoyable, even though it is complex. And when I say complex, I don't mean that it's quick and difficult to play, but it's just, it kind of strolls through scenic paths that are unexpected, and it's very well put together. Well, I do enjoy this album, and I think anyone who hasn't listened to Kevin Morby would find this album to be very good. It does bore me just a little bit. I've been listening to Kevin Morby for a few years now, and hearing him do a lot of the same stuff, even though it gets better, is a bit old. I'd love to hear him explore a little bit, but I'm also not the person that wants artists to stay the same. I am curious if other Morby fans feel the same, though. All in all, I do love this album, and just because he's doing the same thing and doing it better isn't really a reason to knock it. Throughout the album, the quality is consistent. But the stars of the show, I think, would be Campfire, Provisions, Brother Sister, and A Night at the Little Los Angeles, along with Don't Underestimate Midwest American Sun. This one belongs in the love list.
All right, so first off, we are going to discuss Actress, Karma and Desire. Actress is an English electronic music producer who has really gone all over the place. He kind of lives in that post-quartet, post-burial space that is taking a lot of different genres, combining, shifting them around, and really giving you a lot to chew on. And I have to say, I was really struck by what a magical album this is, kind of sort of how much it rewards a close listening, because there are so many different moments that are compiled into songs. There's sort of different layers of, a lot like a One of Tricks Point Never, where it's sort of sometimes commenting on a musical genre more than actually enacting it. I think it kind of owes a lot to Burial's relationship with R&B in that regard, because you have very ambient music, but with touches of pop, touches of R&B, touches of electronic. It is a really, really, really cool album, and one that I think definitely rewards a close listen, rewards repeated listens, and keep your ear really peeled when you're listening to this for these moments where the artist Sampha, who I first became aware of when he did music with Drake, pops in and he has this very kind of Moses Sumney-esque, although I think he started making music before him. He has this very ethereal voice, and I would say there's an ethereal layer or haze or gaze that kind of falls over the entire album, and it adds a lot to it. It's a great listen for, taking a drive in your car or putting your headphones on if you can kind of curl up at home or something like that. I really recommend Karma and Desire by Actress. That's a love for me.
Next, I'd like to discuss Mary Lattimore, who is a harpist who recently released a new album consisting of her harp and some added digital soundtrack titled Silver Ladders. She's released consistently for the last 6 years, but has actually been featured as a session musician for various indie musicians like Kurt Vile. Her playing is intricate and spacey and very clean. The different tracks put you in 7 different environments that often match their titles. The backing tracks of guitar, synths, more harp, and abrasive static really add to the world that she's sculpting, and it makes for a really easy listen. The production is really nice, providing distance between the sounds involved to give it a empty, vast feeling. If harp or classical instruments aren't really your thing and they're not really the kind of albums you'd want to pursue, I would still encourage you to listen to this one. It's a short listen, and you're still going to find value here, especially if you enjoy ambient albums. I believe this album is small and digestible enough for a casual listener to enjoy. And it also makes for great background music if you're working or studying or whatever you might be doing. My favorites are Pine Trees, Don't Look, and 30 Tulips. This comes highly recommended. I do love this album.
Next up, we have Shamir, the self-titled album by Shamir. Now, this is an artist who has been making music for a few years and sort of came to prominence for having this very unusual voice and for kind of having this almost, prior to people like Lil Nas X and this sort of ongoing conversation about sort of post-genredom and how do you categorize certain sounds. Shamir was an artist who sort of burst onto the scene with a lot of life and to me sort of brought a lot of that Gen Z energy to modern music. And it's interesting because my original recollection of Shamir was very much like as an R&B artist and maybe like a post R&B artist if you want to get into that. But this self-titled album does kind of go in a slightly different direction. There's a lot more guitar. It is a rock album. And in that regard, it kind of pushes some expectations and that awesome, iconoclastic, unique voice is still there, but it definitely shows an artist who is willing to push in different directions, open up a little bit, and songs like Pretty When I'm Sad that again, just have more of like a crunchy sound to them, have more of almost like an alternative rock, Pavement kind of sound to them, are really exciting. And so I have to say, this album is one I feel like I haven't fully wrapped my head around it yet. I haven't fully digested everything there is to appreciate, but I like it. And so I'm going to put Shamir's self-titled album, Shamir, as a love, but it is one that it's going to challenge your expectations at least a little bit, at least in what you think it should be, most likely. So I'm going to, that's a bit of a qualify. It's more of a like maybe than a love. But I encourage you to check this album out, especially if you haven't heard Shamir's music before, because I really feel like Shamir's output is some of the more interesting stuff to be happening in the last couple of years in that sort of R&B meets rock meets pop kind of fusion space. And for that reason, I was digging this album. I was digging it.
If you know anything about my music taste, you're not going to be surprised that today I want to talk about Clipping. The experimental storytelling horror rap group Clipping has released Visions of Bodies Being Burned. This serves as a sequel to There Existed an Addiction to Blood. It is another series of horror stories compiled together to chill you this Halloween, and it does a great job of maintaining that same style and effect that There Existed an Addiction to Blood had. The static is present as expected, honestly probably more than TEAB, which is saying something. David's performance is quick and dark, the production is grimy and aggressive, and the features are actually quite strong. The interludes actually add a lot to the album, Drove being quite the terrifying sheep herd. The album is perfect for Halloween and can definitely spook you good. I will say that the sequel is not as strong as the first album in my opinion. I felt the storytelling was better and the songs were a little bit more catchier and darker, while this second album mostly just kind of lurks in the shadows and creeps you out rather than outright scares you. But if you enjoyed the last album, you definitely will enjoy this one. It just isn't quite there. Some of what I don't like about the album compared to the first is that the songs are not that different in how they feel, where I felt there was much more variety in the first album. I think different sounds would have really served this album a little bit better. But if you haven't gone into this album, having heard and loved the last one, you're really not going to notice that. And while I say that there's not much variety, the songs don't all sound the same. I'm really just comparing it to the first album and how different all of those different songs were. Overall, the music is good, the rapping is good, the lyrics are great, the features are awesome. It's creepy and the beats are harsh and scary, making for an awesome horror album. Just in time for Halloween, too. I definitely recommend this one, especially if you like any kind of horror. My favorites here are Enlacing, Say the Name, Check the Lock, and Looking Like Me. This one's going on the love list.
Next up, Machine Drums, A View of You. And this is a really, really cool album. I had the chance to see Machine Drum a few years ago, and that whole notion of sort of tech life, breakbeat, really fast moving, really high energy, somewhere between, where dance meets hip hop is just a great space to be. This is a really, really fun album. And I think if you're into that kind of producer, Hudson Mohawk, Dorian concept sound where somebody is just kind of at the board going ham, then this is a perfect album for you. And just great upbeat running dance music. There's a Freddie Gibbs feature on this album that's really, really good. That, you know, just that cane train will just blow you away. He's totally in the pocket, totally in control. So this is an easy one for me. I love the sounds that are happening on this album. I love how high energy it is. It gets me excited to listen to it. And for me, when I think of, you know, a release, it's you know, obviously there are other albums that maybe take more work to appreciate and are worth it, but there is something totally awesome about just locking in on an album like Machine Drum's A View of You and, you know, turning up the headphones, not too loud, don't hurt your ears, but just enjoying just total chaos, the total chaos of dance music. So for me, Machine Drum, A View of You, that's an easy. I love it. And I highly recommend that you go check this album out and just, you know, treat yourself to an audio experience.
The frontman of Black Moth, Super Rainbow, has released another solo project titled Hot, Wet, and Sassy. That being the title, you'd get a picture of what you'd expect, especially from an artist like Tobacco. But honestly, I expected way more hot, wet, and sassiness. I'll mention I haven't really been a big fan of Tobacco or BMSR, but I haven't really hated anything. The album, in my opinion, really just disappoints. It feels quite vaporwave-esque throughout and doesn't really have that like feeling of nostalgia that vaporwave naturally has. The beginning of the project is pretty strong. It's enjoyable. Centaur Skin and Pit are probably the strongest tracks on this album. And Stab by Night is also quite good, but I feel that this album suffers from a lot of underdevelopment. I don't see a lot of these songs really going anywhere, and honestly, I just want to shut it off after a minute of each song. Being that he uses the masked vocoder style, his lyrics aren't really interesting enough to carry the song, and it's not really anything that he has to say. It's just that it's so difficult to understand the lyrics on those first few listens that it just won't work on its own. Ask the Truth is the best example of this, and in my opinion, the beginning of the worst part of this album. Jin Menken as well also trudges along slowly and puts you to sleep by repeating rhythms and beats over and over again, and the vocals just slowly luring you to sleep. This to me is the opposite of what I expected from Hot, Wet, and Sassy. Babysitter picks up a little bit with fatter bass and deep vocoded voice that differs from the rest of the album, but it's still just kind of lackluster. Halfway through this song, they just turn everything up to 11 and just kind of overblow everything that's going on. It doesn't really make it better. I mean, I imagine if you're listening to this in a big theater, maybe it's a little bit more enjoyable, but everything's overblown. Like, you can't really discern what's going on. It just feels like the annoying guy blasting his music down the streets in his Honda Civic after he just explored the EQ function in his stereo, and now suddenly he thinks he's a bass head, and that is all there is to music. I'm just thankful that generally these are short songs. If you're a Tobacco fan, you might enjoy this album, but I think also be quite disappointed as well. I did have an appreciation of the Malibu Ken album with A$AP Rock, but this album really just kind of sees him not really sure what to do. Following Babysitter, he kind of goes into a strange ambient vibe for 3 songs, and again, I mean, that's cool and all, but it's not really hot, wet, and sassy either. The ambient songs are pretty sleep-inducing, and they're not good ambient tracks, so don't get too excited. Body Double sees it pick up finally a little bit more, and Motherfucker 64, while not a great song, in the context of everything I just suffered through, it sounds great. Perfect Shadow closes the album on not a banger, but a sigh, as you are grateful it is over and disappointed it wasn't exactly what you hoped for. Turn this shit off. Well stated. Tobacco, Hot, Wet, and Sassy goes in the hate list.
Next up, we have Sign by Autiker. And this is an artist that I've known about for a long time. I was actually recently watching a Darren Aronofsky film from the 90s and saw that there was Autechre music in it. I was totally blown away. I was like, wow, this is somebody that you would put in the same kind of Square Pusher, Aphex Twin contemporary category. And it's awesome. I mean, there's a lot of music out there by this duo. And it's really exciting to see that they have a new album. I was really intrigued by the album artwork, this, really cool looking sort of sign. And I have to say, it definitely has. I mean, you can look at the album titles or the song titles, and there are these kind of mashed up words, like the, Mataz, 4/8 and stuff like that. I mean, stuff that is a little bit, hard to pick apart. It has that kind of data-y feel of Aphex Twin music, but I really do find this a very interesting album. It's so sort of mathematical and ambient in nature, and that's really what attracted me to it. I like it a lot. I will say it's a tough, if you're not really into the deeper, more maybe computery kind of data stream style of electronic music, it's really hard to recommend this album. So it's tough because it's more of a like from me. It's like I really enjoy this kind of stuff. I can appreciate those tones and those textures, and it's quite a long album as well. It's an hour long or maybe just a tad more. And so if you can't get yourself in the headspace to really kind of go along with this computer generated, very digital sounding music, it might not do much for you. So, I mean, this is a very qualified, very, very, specific love. It's like a love from the head, not necessarily a love from the heart. So, I mean, I can dig this kind of stuff. I mean, I recommend if you're trying to go into the deep end of electronic music and really explore, I think you should check out this album, Signs by Autechre, and really digest and turn it over. But I have to say, it's a big time acquired taste. And so, check yourself before you push play on that, because it's very easy to just find yourself kind of lost and confused, amongst these songs that, sometimes can have pretty active feel to them. But, also at the same time, a song like the one I mentioned, Mataz, is like, total drone sleeper hit that, might be a big turnoff for some.
Moving along, getting into Knives is Mountain Goat's 19th studio album and the second one released just this year. Unlike their previous album, Mountain Goats is up to their typical antics with a full ensemble of assorted musicians and John Darnielle leading the team. It is generally an upbeat album about succeeding and doing whatever it takes in order for you to get there. Their lyrics, while descriptive and often speaking literally, can be a little bit hard to discern their true meaning or inspiration. While it's not true for every single track on this piece, it is quite fun to pick them apart and think about them a little bit more beyond what they mean literally. As Many Candles as Possible is one of the more enjoyable tracks, and it is very memorable even on the first listen. Following this, Tidal Wave comes as an easier tune to understand right off the bat, comparing tidal waves to our everyday problems being over-exaggerated, even if they are so minor that we might never really think about them in the near future. A parallel being that not every good thing that we can do will be great or memorable, but we just have to accept that some things are small and they're not really worthy of the tidal wave title. There are some deeper and darker moments on this project, many being quite introspective. The Last Place I Saw You Alive is a great track that discusses memories and thoughts of death that seem to spring from reminders in this world that we generally don't tend to think about very often. And when we do, we don't really seek them out on purpose. Even by the title, you can tell this is one of the darker songs on this album, and it's very good and views death in a way that, in my experience, not many Americans think about. Rat Queen through Getting Into Knives is fantastic, back-to-back tracks, and perfect close to the album. If you listen to Mountain Goats in the past, you know what to expect. It's going to be quite good. I foresee myself listening to this even further, as a few listens is really not enough to appreciate this whole thing. Every song on here is catchy and interesting, and I appreciate albums that don't have even one song that sticks out like a sore thumb. This one definitely goes on my love list.
I was really trying to push myself when I found this album, Aguita, by Gabriel Garcon Montano. And this was an album, I'm happy to say, I had no frame of reference for when I listened to it, except that I think it was maybe put out through Stone's Throw Records. I generally am interested. It was either them or Ninja Tune. But basically, I was intrigued. It's got a wild cover. I mean, the cover gives you a good hint of where you're going to be headed on this album. But there's so much going on this album. There's parts with auto-tuned vocals. There's singing in multiple languages. There is just sort of pure genre, gender. It's, total throw it all away, confusion, and then a dash of like, you're in a musical at the same time, right? You're in this very kind of effervescent, over-the-top space. So this is a tough one because it is so catchy sometimes. It's a very, very, very interesting album that often made me feel overwhelmed and a bit perplexed. But then certain songs, I'm thinking of like Mirror My Look, that just really pulled me in and captured my attention and made me go, this is pretty cool. So this album for me is almost simultaneously love and hate. I think that there are some moments on it that maybe stretch a little too far or just left me totally perplexed and confused. But at the same time, it was a really captivating experience and I enjoyed it a lot. So I'm sort of at a loss for words when it comes to describing this album because there's so much going on during it. So it's one to ponder. It's not in my frame of reference and I couldn't as easily identify what I did or didn't respond to in it, but I was absolutely intrigued by this album and it's a head scratcher in the best way.
Finally, we have Nothing, The Great Dismal. The metal indie amalgam band Nothing has released their latest project, The Great Dismal. If you haven't heard Nothing's music, it mixes a lot of heavy metal style with distorted guitars and then takes indie style of singing and drumming and just clashes them together. If you're someone that wants to get involved into heavier music or metal, but really just can't get past that initial barrier that a lot of people have, Nothing could be a great backdoor for you. As the title states, the album is quite dark and depressing in tone and style. A Fabricated Life is the opener and sets the tone right away, discussing themes of faking it or possibly having imposter syndrome. Just achieving success, but something is still not quite what you want, and everything still feels wrong. This is followed by what, in my opinion, is the best track, Say Less. This sees the band go more headfirst into the metal direction, and it's quite good. The vocals are still clean, but the guitars have heavy distortion and rapid rhythms. It feels reminiscent of a Linkin Park or Green Day song. Maybe it's just the lyrics with the reference of being numb. April Haha is also more in the metal realm than some of the other songs and follows Say Less. It is a bit slower vocally and a little bit less interesting, but the drums and guitar make up for it well enough. Catch a Fade takes the turn into indie themes in just about every way. It is one of the better tracks as well. The guitar is interesting and really fun to follow throughout the whole track. Bernie Sanders isn't really one of the tracks I enjoy very much. It feels repetitive and a little uninteresting. Following that, In Blueberry Memories is a good track sounding similar to Say Less with cleaner vocals and a little less guitar. This is probably one of the more perfectly blended mixes of metal and indie. Right after this is Blue Mecca, a slow, dreamy track with quiet, whispery vocals and serene guitars fluttering in the background. It's quite nice, and then it starts taking a darker turn about halfway through the track into a more doom metal style. You can kind of think some Chelsea Wolfe vibes. The lyrics are dark and they float above this creepy soundscape that was created by the guitars and the drums. If there was possibly a track to take the number one spot from Say Less, it would be this one. Just the story is a bit more upbeat while keeping its dark, dreamy rock vibe. This one for me is a bit more forgettable though. It sounds different from the rest of the album and sounds more like rock music from the 2000s. Finally, we get to Ask the Rust. As the closer, it's not great. It repeats, and there's little development compared to some of the other songs. The end does develop a little bit, but it just kind of repeats until it just fades out, and you just kind of end. It's a weak ending in my opinion, but it definitely doesn't belong in the hate list at all. There's a lot of really enjoyable tracks to listen here. I think just overall as an album, it's not that strong. If I said anything that piques your interest, give it a listen. If not, move along. You're really not missing a whole lot. But Salmondrw, with your general disinterest in heavier genres like metal, I'm going to send The Great Dismal your way as the recommendation for October. Not so you hate it, but hopefully the blend of indie with metal may make it a little bit easier for you to appreciate the heavier genres in the future, if that appreciation ever comes forward. And if not, at the very least, you'll have a few tracks that I think you will enjoy, because the indie vibes going on throughout this album are also very good.
Last but not least, we have Anime, Trauma, and Divorce by Open Mike Eagle. I'm generally a huge Open Mike Eagle fan. Got to see him a few years ago. It was awesome. Super fun live show. Really, really interesting crowd work. And Open Mike Eagle kind of brings that same style, a lot of humor. I love that he's embraced, the anime vibes with like the I'm a Joestar, way of kind of looking at the world. The JoJo's themes on this are hilarious. The Evangelion Shinji themes on this, like Head Ass Shinji, really, really funny. Sometimes I wish he would go even a little further into it, but frankly, I know he's not quite that kind of guy. I feel like he's a guy who wears the references on his sleeve, and he can get into it if he needs to, but he uses them, I think, in his rap more as like a metaphor or a way of thinking than necessarily some of these other songs that are becoming popular right now that are just, devoted to being like anime nerdcore stuff. Open Mike Eagle takes a slightly more adult way of looking at it. You get that, I think, on, his songs about self-care. And this is a guy, as the title implies, who's gone through a lot. And I think this album really highlights that. But it's very, very funny. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's got some really serious themes that it tackles. And altogether, I just think this is a fun, smart, emotional album. And it's one that I plan to keep coming back to. It's one that combines a lot of my favorite things. So, Open Mike Eagle, Anime, Trauma, and Divorce is an easy love for me. Which I may add, brings me, I think I've had a few I've been on the fence about, but I know inside my heart that it's been a lot of love for me this month. And I think that's just because some really great albums came out. So I may need to do a little bit more digging next month to come up with more hate, more disagree, but I was just blown away by a lot of the styles I was hearing, and I think it's a great time to be a music listener, so I was getting a lot out of these albums. With that in mind, that brings us to the part where I once again get to suggest an album to my friend Erlan Rots, and I know exactly the one. It's tough because there's a lot of directions we could go. I think that the warped electronics of Sign would be really interesting for Erlan. I would love to hear your take on Karma and Desire, but what I really want to know your opinion on, because I need help deciphering this album. I need help understanding what it's trying to achieve, all the references it's bringing together. I would love to hear your opinions on Aguita by Gabriel Garcon Montano, and just help me, figure out where this album is coming from, because I feel like it's taking influences from a lot of different places and mashing them up. And I would just love to see how you react to this one and what you respond to and what you're really digging. So please, Erlan, let me know what you think about this album. I'll tell you, I also, in thinking back to that Durian album that I sent you, I'm really intrigued. I hope that it is, I'm excited to hear what you have to say about it. So when the video drops and we get to talk about it, it will be really fun for me to know and kind of get that reward of how exactly I responded to it. I was really pleased and appreciated with Cults that I felt like you gave me a really good dark pop album, but at the same time, it's like it was pop, dream pop, shoegaze in a great way that I didn't find too confrontational or overwhelming. And so in that regard, I really responded well to what you suggested to me. So Thanks for the suggestion. I am seriously thrilled to see what you have to say about the next one. With that taken care of, that brings us to the end of our portion, my portion of Rot and Drew's Love-Hate October 2020. We're wading into November, a lot to think about, a lot of albums to listen to, so just excited to hear what people are responding to in this great time for music and music releases.
If you enjoyed, please subscribe, leave a like. You can follow us on any social media down below. You can also follow us on Twitch for weekly live streams that happen every Friday.
But please stick with us. Check out all the wondrous things that are going on in the Salmonverse. Check out the website, www.salmonhouse.world. Check out our poppin' Instagram, our low-key Twitter, and anything else you can grab a hold of along the way. And just let us know what's up. Please let us know what you're listening to, or if you have a suggestion for something we should review. I'm Salmondrw. My buddy is Erlan Rots, and we are pleased to be reviewing these albums and letting you know exactly what is worth your time.
So stick around, and we'll see you next time.